Thank you for your kind introduction, and thank you all for being here. I really appreciate, after this great lunch, that you're back. I can see full of energy, reloaded. But just to make sure that your energy is kept up high, I would just like to kick off by starting a few questions. Who from this fantastic audience here has, in the past recent 18 months, been exposed to phishing mails? Could I just get a hand? Wow. 99%. And who knows anyone or has personally been exposed by cyber incidents or data breaches themselves? My goodness. So that's why we are here to discuss one of my favorite topics. Again, thank you all for coming. This is really a fantastic, fantastic conference. I'm so glad to be here in person, and it truly shows that we are social animals and we need each other, and we need this fantastic networking that is happening outside afterwards. So I'm looking forward, after my conversation, my talk, to also engage in some very interesting discussions afterwards. So cybersecurity in the supply chain, especially post-COVID. As supply management is taking a strategic direction into different corporations, we as supply chain professionals, as procurement experts, we need to understand the whole network and all of the systems that are really involved that makes a supply management happen. And in that, we have three different baskets. So firstly, we need to understand the organization and all of the other organizations that are involved internally and externally. Secondly, the people, the internal stakeholders, all of the communities we collaborate with, our partners. And thirdly, all of the activities, the information flow, the end-to-end supply chain, the data management, and how to mitigate risks going forward. And looking at how Industry 4.0 is evolving and emerging, we surely need to understand the latest technologies. We need to understand how complex systems are being integrated and what we can do to contribute in this whole technological evolution that is happening. So let's go a step back, supply chain. And suddenly, all of us, around March last year, were faced in a mode of crisis. And it's been estimated that this whole crisis really affected 400 million individuals, either directly or indirectly, either by losing their jobs, by taking some sort of reduced income, and others were really confronted directly or indirectly with this crisis. But what we learned as supply chain professionals is that this whole mode, it showed us how the whole supply chain, the world wide web of supply chain, is so much interlinked. How all of the businesses, all of the industries, it doesn't matter how large you are, how many employees you have, where you are in the world, how we are all reliant upon each other. So cyber incidents have truly increased over the past of last year, even now, us suddenly having been truly exposed to go into a digital world, a digital way of working. I mean, I heard 1,600 colleagues, experts on the line, dialing in virtually from around the globe. This truly shows how interlinked, how digital we are today. So let's just go back with COVID-19 and just some facts. It's been estimated that over the last year, the amount of phishing mails have truly increased to around 700% of an increase. And this shows, I mean, whenever I check in the morning, I go into my Gmail, even now 5 times a day, I get so many phishing mails which I've never signed up for. And I don't even understand how they're all getting my email address. And all of us and many of my colleagues are just always asking me, Charlotte, why are we suddenly getting so many emails? How can a friend just this weekend, what can I do to stop this inflow of phishing mails? Well, let's find out, and that's what I'll be talking today about, giving some tips, some causes, and some takeaways for all of us that we can apply right away. And someone who's suffered the most is actually the World Health Organization. They've had so many criminals trying to attack The WHO, by using some sort of fake email address, either having WHO and just some different constellation trying to get more COVID information. And this really shows how the criminals go about, how drastic. We need to really understand the impact of it, and we must take it seriously going forward, especially us as supply chain experts, when we collaborate with so many of our first, second, third tier suppliers, and really try and understand the whole network around it, which I will go into details in my next slides. So just to talk a bit about the impact that we've gone through. And we've all seen an increase in just malicious data breaches, phishing mails happening. It's estimated that by 2021, there will be 6 billion extra costs evolving due to all of the costs how to combat, go against these cyber incidents. An example of all this drastic change around us, it reminds me back at the Equifax, the mega breach. For the ones who may remember, back in 2017, we had the big Equifax mega breach where it really, Equifax focusing on the credit rating for different consumers, for companies. They have around 800 million different consumer data, 88 million company data which they're in charge of, and that really reminds me how back in the days how they already started to face these breaches, and just imagine to what extent what we are dealing with right now. So some of the main causes of cyber incidents. Firstly, we have data breaches, security breaches, when our data is being leaked out of the system. Secondly, the whole topic of espionage, hacker attacks, ransomware, where certain criminals go into your system, they take your own data hostage, and you have to pay to get your own data released and to get your own data back in order for your organization to work. And thirdly, quite a few mistakes by employees, and I'm going to go into details how we can mitigate that. So first, I would like to talk about one of my favorite examples. If we all just step back, if we all just think back in the days of 2013, it's quite a long time ago. Time flies, I know, especially at COVID. It's difficult to imagine how long we've been in home office, all of us. But back in 2013, just if you think back, where were you? What did you just do? I remember I just joined Porsche AG, and I led the global marketing procurement department, indirect procurement. And we were faced with organizing a lot of new events, especially in the field of motorsport, and doing all of the negotiations. And suddenly, we also were faced with the fact that we had to protect our own customer information. We had to make sure that all of that information that we were given, that it was dealt with in a professional manner. And now going back to Target, they were facing a similar issue. Back in 2013, they had a big data breach. And it happened so unexpected. It affected 40 million customer credit cards. And the breach, it took place at the point of sale. So could I just get maybe someone in the audience knows, what does HVAC stand for? Do you know? Yeah, absolutely. So HVAC, air conditioning, it's actually heating, ventilation, air conditioning. So this breach, ladies and gentlemen, it took place through a third-party supplier who was in charge for air conditioning in the shops. And they put in a malicious malware, introduced it at the point of sale, and all of the data, the credit card information, got stolen right away. And that whole breach cost them $61 million to pay back the customers, to try and prevent this, in general, the brand from getting their reputation destroyed, from lawsuits, and you name it. So this is just one example. A second example, the WannaCry ransomware. 2017, so a few years after, we are suddenly faced with a ransomware that overnight hit 1 million computers globally, especially affected in 150 countries. And that breach made it cost the company around $4 billion US. It especially affected Renault, Nissan, where the manufacturing plants suddenly shut down overnight. Alarms started ringing. Manufacturing, the production plants, it started just stopping. People didn't really know what was going on. But the criminals didn't only go for the manufacturing plants. They went for British hospitals. They went for the Chinese gas stations. They went for the Russian banks. They took it all. And the way this ransomware would have been prevented was actually just a few weeks ago when Microsoft introduced a simple software update. And just this software update could have prevented this tremendous loss from happening. And it was really just pressing the button and really just pressing update. So you can imagine what they were faced with at that time. And then in order to get that whole data back resolved for the companies, they then had to pay these $4 billion US in damage. And actually, so the criminals would not be seen. It was paid over the Bitcoin currency, over the blockchain. So then no one really knew where was actually in charge for this very much criminal investigation. And then mistakes made by employees. This is just an example that 62%, research says that 62% of our employees, they use their work computer also for their social purposes. If it's accessing websites, some social media access, all of the websites that we use nowadays on a daily basis, or if it's via apps. But these are always ways so that we can then access also some other data breaches. There may be some websites which look so familiar, like the Facebook that you open up in the morning and it has the blue logo. But it's a Facebook that may not be legitimate. Or there may be the cookies usually coming up. And if you don't really activate all of these protections, this is how you can let in unwanted criminals to get your data. Secondly, the password. Nowadays, we think, no, we know it all, we are well secured, we work at big organizations, but there are actually still people that have a simple password such as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And criminals were able just to put in that simple password and breach globally around 23.2 million accounts. And then we have all of the phishing attacks, just 130 million just at the end of 2019, just before COVID took place, or around that time, and then it just went up afterwards. And it's been also said that 75% of our leaders, of our professionals nowadays, still don't activate the multifunction authentication, if it's just your fingerprint or your visual ID. So these are all ways to introduce more protection and just try and educate the workforce to do it. So the UN has also tried to do some research over the years how they can help to mitigate risk, how they can mitigate cybercrimes, introduce frameworks, help organizations kind of find themselves. And they've introduced a series of different types of laws, such as the e-transaction laws, then the data protection privacy laws, which many of you may know, the whole GDPR topic that was really hot also a few years ago. Then we have the cybercrime laws, we have the consumer protection laws, and when we do our research and find out which suppliers we like to collaborate with, we then just need to find out where are they based. And here in the image on my screen, you can clearly see that the dark blue region really covers more than 4 legislations, and then the lighter we go, red, and then beige, up to or even no legislations in place. So this is just a way that you can already alert yourself if there is something happening. So the key cyber supply chain risks Firstly, we have third-party service providers, as we saw in the example with the air conditioning, where we do need to make sure who do we collaborate with. Then the whole poor information security practices, understanding who are your first, second, third, fourth tier suppliers. Then we have the whole topic of software security vulnerabilities down to counterfeit hardware. So quite a few companies, they do leave a certain backdoor open for the experts to go in and repair certain hardware. But that backdoor is again an entry point for criminals to get in and to embed some sort of malware. So here are just some examples for frameworks to use for cybersecurity. Now, there are many frameworks out there, but these are three which I like to use. For example, we have the cybersecurity framework from the National Institute of Standards and Technology. So this is a framework that's heavily being used in the US through organizations, through governments, where in the US, this is just a primary direction, I would say, a go-to framework. Then we have the ISO 2700, which is quite well known. This is more a global cybersecurity framework. And then we have industry-specific frameworks. For example, as we can see, the third one, which is the North American Electric Reliability Corporation framework, and they're very much into more industry focus. So there is no perfect example, but it's a direction how you can, at least as an organization, start to think how are certain frameworks set up and what can you do to at least start in this conversation. So some best practices to secure a safe supply chain. We need to start to review our internal and especially external security procedures and establishing these written security guidelines. So when you have certain suppliers, new suppliers entering your supply chain that you are in contact with, understanding, do they even have a budget to mitigate risk? Have they ever been confronted with cybersecurity issues, with data breaches, with risk in general? Do they have a risk department? Because many companies, they just don't have the knowledge, the education, or even just the budget to implement a complete risk program within the company. So us collaborating with our suppliers, we need to help them. We need to partner with them and ask them how, and understand from which angle they come from. So really understanding what are their procedures, what are their guidelines, and establishing these secure controls internally and externally. But most importantly, and that's really, it's training, sharing this knowledge, not only within your own internal workforce and making sure you train your employees, your teams, but also sharing these best practices with the suppliers by benchmarking and by really proactively hosting these sessions and just exchange. What softwares do you use? What have you experienced? I think now, during COVID, is a time that we really need to engage in that dialogue with each other, especially in our industry. What have they discovered? Also within different regions, because as you saw, these breaches, they can just happen globally, overnight. So I think it first comes down to our own supplier network analysis. And before we engage, or also while we engage with our partners, we need to make sure that we understand how does our supply network analysis look like. And that's really understanding not only who are our first-tier suppliers, but actually going more into detail. And I know as procurement professionals, I just went for my first-tier suppliers, or even second-tier at the most. But I never really, I said, it's up to my first-tier suppliers to take responsibility who they collaborate with. But no, we cannot be so arrogant anymore, or ignorant. We need to understand that it's a partnership. We need to go and have an open communication and also dig down who they collaborate with and really understand how do their processes relate to ours and how can we help them. And then understanding what are our integral business processes. Again, how do they look like? Really understanding a bit more depth and going the extra mile, speaking to different departments within your organizations. An example is also the whole storage and transportation. While we try to collaborate, if we have our manufacturing plant and then we collaborate with certain suppliers to deal with the transportation, such as DHL or FedEx, it's important just to understand how do their risk program look like. So you see, it's examples like that, and then also just different communication interfaces, really making sure that there is a full picture and that you have the knowledge. So technologies are truly emerging around us. And everyone is really talking nowadays about AI, deep learning, but these are all ways how they can help us discover patterns. For example, also the whole topic of behavioral analytics. If we have a certain tracking number, and over the past years, there's always been these and these many materials that got requested from the system, and suddenly there is a tremendous more increase. That's when the system suddenly pops up and discovers, maybe you need to look into this, because like with the new technologies, we can understand patterns, and they can help us to get these warning signals up front. And using technology, we can make sure to also protect our own system. So for example, the embedded hardware authentication, making sure that you do activate that. Then using the blockchain cybersecurity is also a great way to protect your own company. So in summary, we need to act now. There is potential to create impact in that field by collaborating with each other, by benchmarking, and by doing a lot of best practices within your organization, but also within your industry and different partners, suppliers out there. So this is a super relevant topic for all of us, and I hope I was able to give you a bit of insights, at least to how to start, how to mitigate, and especially some examples how we can also educate our internal workforce and our colleagues around us. So thank you so much for listening, and are there any questions from the audience? Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Brilliant presentation. Now, we do have some questions. I think we're going to actually see them up on screen here. Here we go. Now, I think this is quite relevant. The first one at the top there. Has remote working been a gift for cyber criminals?
What a great question. I mean, to be honest, it has opened up doors. Everyone had to go digitally, virtually overnight, or in a very short amount of time. And not many companies were fully prepared. Not many even had a risk organization within their company. Not many even knew what to do, how to go about it, and especially didn't even have budget available. So, fantastic question. I think it has opened up a lot of doors for criminals to enter, to try and get data in an illegal way. It has increased a lot of creativity within criminals, and so I guess yeah.
So it has opened more doors for these criminals, right? So do you think that organisations are taking that seriously enough? They sort of lead on from each other, because if you're suddenly creating extra opportunities for these criminals to attack you, surely you have to be spending more and protecting yourself better. But are companies actually doing that?
And I'll be so interested to hear the opinion from the audience, because I can really speak. In my past, I worked in 5 different industries, in 3 continents for multinational companies. And in my last company, we actually set up a complete department from scratch, focusing on procurement, implementing a procurement risk program, and allocating staff, allocating budget. And it was truly led by our leadership, and was really top-down, making sure that we educate ourselves, and then we educate our workforce, our colleagues, but not only once. It was actually, there were reminders monthly, making sure that it's again alert and doing tests. Suddenly I received a test phishing mail once in a while, just to make sure that I'm still alert. So my company back then, they really made this effort to educate and furthermore to benchmark with other similar companies in the field. So I have to say that it was a wake-up call for many companies, but I'll be so interested to hear, we have so many senior leaders today in the audience, maybe Glenn.
Hi, Charlotte. Thank you for your presentation. It was brilliant. Question leads on from the tech event we did a couple of weeks ago. So network security, application security, but how do you feel we are with IoT now, or in particularly IIoT, because with the connection of all devices, data, robots, our factories linked into ERP systems, how are we going to protect core infrastructure going forward? That was question one. And question two, when you are affected by a ransomware, do you pay the ransom?
Especially with your first question. I think if we look at new technologies, we need to really start embracing them. We need to see how they build on top of each other. I don't think we are at a stage where we can say, oh, this is just IoT, AI, deep learning. We need to make sure how they all feed off each other, because at the end, it's all building on each other. And especially with these new technologies, this will be a way for us to, especially to improve, to see different patterns, to see trends, and especially looking at the whole manufacturing plant, we've made tremendous increase in the way technology has emerged just over the last 10 years, and especially now, looking at the future ahead, I think. Especially being able to detect different patterns, that's how IoT in the manufacturing space will especially become quite handy. And to actually, how does the audience feel? Is there anyone in the audience who would like to say something about their own experience?
Well, ransomware, that was a yes or no question. So if you were a victim of a ransomware attack, how many people would pay it?
Any
Show of hands?
Depends how good your backups are.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. For people at home, about 3 hands were raised. So that's a very small percentage of people said they would pay. I'm not going to tell you who said they would, just in case we get some cyber attacks. Okay. One more question then. Let's take this one at the top here again. Are companies taking cybersecurity seriously enough, or only when it's too late? The classic story of bolting the stable door after the horse has bolted.
Absolutely. I'm curious, before I answer this question, is there anyone in the audience that now has also set up their own new risk program, or has done anything within their organization to combat or to increase awareness for cybersecurity? Any stories in the audience today? I know we're after lunch, so I know we need to all, you know, but I'm just so curious to learn from this audience, especially. Have you? Yes, Lucy.
Hi, Lucy Day, Complete Software. I used to work for Sage, the software company, not the government advisory group, so don't ask me any questions about COVID. And they actually spent a lot of time investing in a training program for the entire organization. They hired 13,000 people globally, and it was all about reputational risk. It was all about understanding what the impact of a data breach could be to reputation, to customers' data. And I think that's where it needs to start. It needs to start with the employees, because ultimately they are the ones that are going to drive your cybersecurity program. If they're not on board, it's a risk.
Thank you, very good point. Especially educating the employees on a regular basis. I think this is something that we can easily do to educate or get best practices, or actually proactively encouraging benchmarking and open conversations with each other in the industries.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid. But thank you, Charlotte.
Thank you.